Welcome back. Thank you so much for rejoining us, and I hope you enjoyed your lunch. Now then, hands up if you managed to meet 3 new people that you haven't spoken to before. Oh, I'm well impressed. I managed 2, so well done. Yes, so excellent. You listened, you acted, and that's exactly what we hope you'll be doing more of as we go on from today. Also, for your peace of mind, your delicious vegan spread was made locally by a catering company just down the road and will have been full of wonky veg and locally sourced and in-season ingredients. And it always tastes better that way, doesn't it? Did you enjoy the duck wrap? Did everybody have the duck wrap? That was very yummy. Now, without further ado, let's get on with the remainder of our program. And I'm pleased to welcome Steve Smith, the project manager on the Screen New Deal Transformation Plan, who leads our next session.
Got a great panel here with me today talking about introducing infrastructure. And first of all, we've got Robert Llewellyn from Fully Charged. We've got Ella Nevill from CAMA, Lee Jackson from Wolf Studios, and Marsden Proctor, sorry, from ADF Facilities. Can I get you, first of all, perhaps to just quickly introduce yourselves and tell us a little bit about what you're doing? So, Robert, can I start with you?
Yes, my name's Robert Llewellyn. I've worked in your industry for many years, proper telly, proper grown-up, mature telly. But for the last 13 years, I've been doing a fake telly YouTube channel, a channel called Fully Charged, the Fully Charged Show, which is about electric vehicles, electric ground transport in general, renewable energy, clean technology, circular economy, a very wide range of stuff. We run 2 channels. One is called the Fully Charged Show. The other one's called Everything Electric. Fully Charged Show focuses more on things with wheels, I guess, and the Everything Electric is everything very much about home energy at the moment, about how renewable energy is growing. So big picture, I think, stuff. And we also run live events. So this weekend coming, we're in Amsterdam for a live event, and they are enormously well attended. And it was a big shock to me that's our funding model, is that we run live events that we pray make us a little bit of money to allow us to put stuff out on YouTube where the funding model doesn't work. I think is a fair way of describing it. So that's what I do.
And you have ratings that the terrestrial TV industry would love, don't you? I think you don't do.
I mean, we have, I don't know how you judge it, but we have around about 1.5 million to 2 million views a week. We've got 1 million subscribers, or just over 1 million subscribers. I don't know how you equate that with, I used to be in a series called Red Dwarf on the BBC. We got 10 million people watched it. More people watch Red Dwarf than Top Gear. Let me just make that. I've made that point. At its peak, at its absolute peak in the late 90s, we beat that lanky, curly-haired Rick, who's very good with his farming show. I love his farming show.
Yeah, the best sustainability show on telly,
Wonderful.
isn't it? I mean, that's really good.
Yeah.
Ella, can you tell us a bit about CAMA?
Yeah, so my background's in climate tech, and now I'm head of engagement and partnership development at CAMA. So we have AssetStore, Asset Flow, and Asset Cycle. We have storage facilities. We have an asset management platform, which helps productions to digitalize their prop sets and costumes. And now, very excitingly, we're building off of the circular economy reuse work that we've always done with a new offering called Asset Cycle. Not only does that help productions recirculate their prop sets and costumes back into the industry, but very exciting, really a bit nerdy for me, and hopefully everyone in this room, is that we're providing carbon life cycle analysis data on the impact of reuse. So yeah, very excited to share more about that.
Perfect. Lee, can you tell us a bit about Wolf Studios? And
yeah, I'm the manager of Wolf Studios, been there for about 7 years. It's a 300,000 square foot capacity in Cardiff, not far from here. It belongs to Bad Wolf, and we're part of the Sony Pictures group. It's a very busy environment. Doctor Who, His Dark Materials, those kind of things. Very busy, very fast environment. We're always trying to be as green and as sustainable as possible, really, because we do recognize that it's a very fast industry that we're all in, and it's easy to make a quick decision that might have a longer lasting effect on the environment. So we're quite fortunate that we have a sort of enough of our own productions to keep reusing and be sort of circular within our own microclimate, but always open to opportunities and discussions with others to share that and learn.
Brilliant. And Mars, can you tell us a bit about ADF and your role there?
So I'm Marsden Proctor, CEO of ADF. So we're one of the largest suppliers of facility vehicles in the UK, can be a bit of a white elephant in the room when we're talking about sustainability. So we have just over 700 units. They're not all got motors. Most of those are trailers, but we have about 150 units that have engines. All of those are what we call Euro 6. So they're the most economic and environment friendly vehicles out there. The other thing that we do is we have bases in Pioneer Studios in Scotland, in Manchester, another regional base in Bridgend, which services the southwest of Wales, and a big operational base in Longcross. In 2022, because things were going well for us, we decided to become a public company and floated on the stock exchange. And with the money that our very sensible investors gave us, we made an acquisition of a company called Location One, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, who are at the forefront of sustainability with Carly and Crispin and their team. And since then, we've started to work very closely together, which we'll come on to shortly, to create a product called EcoBase, which I hope will prove to be of interest to everyone here.
Brilliant, thank you. I just want to start by bringing it back to the Screen New Deal today. So this is a report that's been released today, mapping a route map really to zero carbon, zero waste. It's specific to Wales, but there are lots of kind of recommendations in there that are UK-wide and applicable to other kind of countries as well. But the kind of start of the Screen New Deal was a project that started actually a couple of years back, which was more UK-wide. And one of the things that was fascinating is at the end of that, they made some recommendations for the film and TV studio side of the industry. And the studio sector really kind of jumped on that. And we launched last year a project called the Studio Sustainability Standard, which is a framework for studios to be able to sort of measure their emissions, for us to be able to score them so that we can kind of benchmark studios against each other, and to kind of go on a journey where we at Albert can support studios as they kind of move towards that net zero, zero waste future. And I'm delighted that in Wales, Wolf Studios led the way. Really exciting news this year is that we've now got 6 studios in Wales committed to being part of the sustainability standard, which is being funded by Creative Wales, which is a really significant initiative. At the end of that process, we'll almost be able to say what the studios sector for an entire country's emissions are, which is really good. But Lee, just thinking about last year, how valuable was the studio standard to Wolf?
It was really valuable. It was a leap of faith, really, because we were involved with Albert and BAFTA and Arup in some of the early sort of conversations on Screen New Deal, and this scorecard was sort of coming around. And some people had a lot of reservation, really. Do they want their scores out there? Do they want to be judged? Do they want to be held against anybody else? But for us, it was just we didn't even think about it. We were realist. It wasn't about the score. It was about things that we were doing that we wanted to recognize, but also the things that we weren't doing, we wanted to pick up and learn. So we learned an awful lot from it. Really, a lot of stuff, you know, there were easy gains. We're 900,000 kilowatt hour facility. We're 100% renewable since 2018. But you can't stop there. There were so many other things around there. It's easy to pay a little bit extra for an energy contract, but it's about believing in that and making sure that everything that you do, not just the energy supply, is trying to be as green as possible.
And when we talk about the studio standard, you're talking about scores. Basically, it's a system where we've got sort of 6 key themes. So circularity, which is about trying to encourage the studio to work within a circular economy. Climate, which is about the kind of energy use. People, which is ensuring a studio is a sort of people-friendly place to work at. Management is all around the sort of policies that you have in place. Data, and then nature, because a lot of studios have nature spaces. And so we're asking questions that we can kind of rate studios on their progress. Is there something that you would say has been a sort of particular success story at Wolf in terms of some of the things that you're doing?
As a result of the scorecard. Yeah, we've looked at people, the people side of things. There were some mental health first aid people, some well-being facilitators. I'm sure you all know in this industry, it's very, very busy, very stressful on some people, long hours. script led, and that kind of thing could put big demands on people. So recognizing that people need that support, and if they need to talk, there's people there. So we have employment welfare sort of adverts and schemes up around that people can contact, facilitators, that kind of thing. So the people side of things is important, and also on a sustainable side, passing on that that knowledge and that culture. We want to be green. Any ideas, come speak to us. We've got a sustainability committee really with any production that now that has come in. It's sort of built up probably since 2019 with our own productions, and we sit with all the coordinators of each department, and we kind of we discuss things, steps forward, plans, any issues, any shortcomings, any advice. So again, from a people perspective, I know it's sustainably orientated, but from a people perspective, providing that support to the people.
That's really good. And again, I know that it's having impact on productions. Obviously, Doctor Who in production at the moment, and we're talking to some of the team there, already starting to sort of think about initiatives that will kind of follow through on screen for that production.
Yeah, we're trying to reuse sets a lot. We like I said, we're 300,000 square foot, but out of that, 140,000 square foot is stage space. So service areas, communal routes, that kind of thing, that takes up a bit of space. So we're trying to keep and maintain and as circular as possible with all our sets. And we've got a heritage at that facility since 2017 of holding on to props, holding on to some key set pieces, some expensive manufacturing pieces, which are labor intensive. And one of the key things, and it comes two ways. It comes from us and it comes from the productions inside. There's an advantage to holding it on site from a green point of view. It's not going to be shipped off and then shipped back again when we need it again. It is, I'm sure, as you know, anybody in infrastructure, storing stuff is a problem. It's one of our biggest problems, but trying to keep the productions using and reusing. We went to the Screener deal and we were speaking to CAMA and a few other people about recycling sets, and a lot of set elements, the way they're built and the size of the sets that we sort of build, they're structural. So they're glued together and they're really strong. They're not easy to take apart, take the timber out and recycle it. So we try to be as circular as we can with sets that are plastered or covered in tiles and that kind of thing, and reuse those things. We try as hard as we can not to just put stuff in a skip. It's easy to do. It's a fast environment, and I've said that I think once or twice. It's really demanding, and it's easy for somebody to say, bomb that off in a skip. It's not good.
One of the things I found so good about sort of working with the studio standard is the way it's becoming a collaborative thing. And what I really hope in Wales is, with 6 studios participating this year, that there's a way of bringing all those studios together so that they can sort of share experience and knowledge and learn from each other, which I think will be really good.
Absolutely.
Mars, obviously studios are one side of things, but lots of our productions are filmed on location, and that's where you're primarily operating. What's the sort of change in attitude that you think you're getting from productions wanting to work more sustainably on location? Have you sort of noticed a big change recently?
Yeah, no, definitely over the last 18 months. Primarily the questions they ask us are about, are the vehicles ULEZ? Can the generators that we have take HVO? And about battery storage generators. So that's become quite normal now, and things go through phases. The awareness is becoming more and more, but they're the 3 main questions that we get when we start a production. And all our fleet are Euro 6, so that's fine. They can go into those areas. There's no cost, and I'm sure people are aware as they film around the UK now, not just in Wales, but Bristol as ULEZ zones there, in Manchester and Leeds. They're coming everywhere, which is a good thing. And then we move on to the battery and the fuel. Working closely with Location One, they actually provide responsibly sourced HVO fuel, so we can help productions with that, and they can then refuel our vehicles and the base generators.
Just picking up on HVO, because I know from some of the conversations I've had, there's a bit of confusion about what it is. Are you able to just explain?
No, that's a question for Chris.
Okay. Well, I mean, one thing I know is that HVO,
we have to use HVO, not biofuel. I know that.
So HVO basically is a waste fuel product, and the reason it's so important as a transition fuel is that Swapping from diesel to HVO can reduce your carbon emissions by almost 90%. So it's one simple thing. And last year, from the Albert data, we know that in Wales, 91% of productions using generators in Wales were using diesel. So this is such a significant swap that we could do overnight.
One thing that really instigated the change was, I think it was in April 2022, the government stopped the use of red diesel, which was, it's a farming diesel, which was obviously really, really cheap. So then productions had to pay for white diesel, and the difference between white diesel and HVO, back, you know, going back 18 months, there wasn't a great deal in it. So it was an easy conversion across, which really helped. Now at the moment, there's a little bit of a balance, but a lot of it is about everything I'm sure you're speaking about here today. It's about making people aware and giving them understanding. And with these new hybrid generators, the battery generators, the saving on fuel, not to mention the saving on their carbon footprint, can balance out the cost of that. So there isn't really any additional cost at the end of the day for the production. And obviously they're reducing their fuel bill and their carbon footprint.
Now, you mentioned a few minutes ago the kind of eco-based idea. Are you able to sort of explain a bit more about that?
Yeah. So having had Location One join the group, we sat down and started to talk about how we wanted to move forward. And like any business, the first thing you do is talking about business. You're talking about the assets that you've got between the two companies and how we can maximize the utilization of those assets. And a lot of Location One's assets are to do with sustainability. So we came up, after a lot of brainstorming, we came up with the concept of this eco-base. What is the ideal eco-base? So we can be doing, let's say we're doing the Crown, and we go out and we're filming in the countryside. When we arrive with our trucks, when we move out of London and get there, Location One have already been there, and they've got their aluminium tracking down, and they've got some solar powered tower lights lighting it up, and they've got their water bowsers and some generators, and they've got stuff there. When we arrive, we drive in, park up, set up, and we stay there and we film for however many days. So this, the eco-base idea was basically saying, this is all the products that we've got, making people aware of those products. One of the challenges that we have is that if you're a line producer and you engage with us and you know, you're 6 weeks into prep, you've got your budget signed off, etc., you don't have the funds available to have what you might want, but to meet the aspirations of your productions in terms of sustainability and all the products that are there. So what we're trying to do is create that awareness so that the heads of production are aware, production executives, so they can see the products, they can understand what we can do for them, and they can build those into the budget. So when those budgets that then go through to next year, for instance, they have money there available to those teams when they come on board, and then they can, you know, select accordingly to suit their productions. But again, it's all about trying to create this understanding, and the buzz thing at the moment is the hybrid generators and the power monitoring, so we can actually provide data. And one thing that we've started to do that works really well over the last 3 or 4 jobs we've done is at the start of each job, they get a heads department meeting with generally it's the unit manager, the line producer, with the caterers, and they set up a WhatsApp group and they talk about how they're going to run it, but also the data that we get, whether it's the fuel data, whether it's the waste from the fuel or from the grey water, it's fed into that group. So there's data coming all the way through, and there's learning. So we train our HODs, the people that are on the base every day looking after stuff. So we all know the busiest time for a production is in the morning. So if we're filming down the road on his darkest materials, it's up and running at 6 o'clock. Generators are on, it's winter, all the heating's on, all the lights are on, everyone's coming in, everyone has breakfast, and then everyone goes on to set at 8 o'clock and the base is left empty. Well, the amount of power that's used between 6 and 8 is high, but then it dips. So having a trained team on the base can then control what's being used and what's not, so they can turn heating off and stuff. But we can also monitor the power, and the generators, they actually speak to each other's intelligent connection, and they switch over to the battery. So it runs on the battery for that amount of time then throughout the day. So these learnings are then passed on. And then what happens is the people that have worked with on those jobs get a bit of understanding. It's not so scary. They understand that what can happen and what can be done. And then when they leave that production, they go on to the next production and they start spreading the word. And that way, you know, people get an understanding of what is available out there and how to move forward.
So from recent experience, I would say two of the biggest things that productions can sort of do if they want to sort of start working more sustainably is, first of all, think about those budget lines. We have to start putting budget lines in for sustainability and breaking the budgets down so that we're sort of seeing what we're spending on fuel for generators and what we're spending on other things. And then also just those heads of department meetings. If the one thing you can do as a new production is get all your heads of department together with some kind of sustainability advisor, people like Chris Spin, you know, from Location One, to start talking about those opportunities as a team and how you can collaborate with each other. It's so impactful, isn't it? It's really good.
Well, definitely. And it's also with the awareness when people start the production, if you know, 12 months ago, we'd go on to a production and maybe do 2 weeks of generator monitoring. Well, it depends on which 2 weeks you go there, and people don't
installed by a company I had never heard of. So that's how quickly the industry is moving. That said, I just think it's really important to say it's not our fault that we drive combustion cars. It's, you know, because sometimes people say to me, oh, I drive a diesel, you'll hate me. And I go, no, it's unless you built the diesel, unless you run an international fossil fuel industry, it's not your fault. The notion, the term of carbon footprint was come up with by the fossil fuel lobby groups. It's your fault, your carbon footprint. You should feel bad buying our fucking product. You know, it's really, really outrageous. So my big shtick is, it's not our fault, but it is getting ready. It will get better. It's inevitable now. There's no argument about it. In 10 years, you'll be driving an electric car. Even if you're a crazy Top Gear petrol head, you'll be driving an electric car normally, and at the weekend, you'll get out the Jag and buff up your pipes and take her out for a spin. And she will be a female. She will have transitioned to female, that car. Knows why. So, you know, it is going to happen. So what I think is interesting in terms of this, because it's basically all the issues people have with electric vehicles now, psychological, not technological. They do work. They do go far enough. There's a really good app, and I've been trying to remember it while I've been sitting here, that you can get that tells you how far you've driven in your combustion car. Because you go, well, I drive 500 miles a day. Every day when I go to work, because I've got to go out to locations, 700 miles. It's 43 miles you actually drive. The average is 22 miles a day for the average. So most people drive under 30 miles a day. Well, that means you can charge an electric car once a week. So it isn't like you're constantly stopping in to plug in and all those sort of, you know, it's a hard thing to communicate in 5 minutes, the different attitudes, but it's not like a petrol car. You don't have to go somewhere, get out of your car, hold a thing that smells, stand there holding it until it's finished filling up, and then put it back and then pay staggering amounts of money for it. You plug it in while you're asleep, while you're having lunch, while you're working. That's when it starts to really work. And so that can work in the studio. Obviously, it's very difficult on a location. We were discussing that earlier on. The thing that I'm interested in is the next level. So you may not know this, but there's now 2,800 fully electric double-decker red buses running in London. That's kind of happened behind it. You wouldn't even notice. You walk down a street in London and there's a double-decker bus overtakes you, and you don't think, oh my goodness, that's electric. It's just a bus. You know, it's not that interesting. But it makes a huge, huge difference. And what is going to be exciting is when there are, and I've been in a few, massive trucks, not little vans or delivery vans or even sort of what we call a lorry, but a huge, big truck that can pull a massive trailer. Those exist already around the world. So I've been in a few of them, and they are just, an electric car is still, even today, cheaper to run than a petrol car. An electric truck is eye-wateringly cheaper to run than a diesel truck. It is mind-boggling. So, and there are really clever things where there are articulated trucks, or lorries, as we call them, which have batteries in the trailer. So there's a battery on the tractor bit at the front that pulls the thing along. But when you plug the two things together, which you always do for the brakes and the safety, it also takes power from the trailer. So there's going to be alternatives that emerge in the next, you know, I'm not going to say 5 to 10 years, we're going on location with literally nothing but battery operated vehicles, solar panels on them. That makes a lot of sense. There's lots of new breakthroughs on that, particularly if you're shooting in the summer. That makes sense. In the winter, less so. We've seen an incredible extending wind turbine in Sweden that just, when it was on the back of a truck and it kind of goes up like that and then goes up. I mean, it's big. It's big. It's a 1 megawatt wind turbine, so it would run a TV production. Those are still experimental, weird student people doing that, but very exciting young people who are making stuff like that. And then, so I think it is down to the infrastructure to be able, for a crew to be able to drive to a remote location in Wales today. I'm saying you could do it, but there'd be some very unhappy people, very stressed and tense people. It's still a bit early, but if you did it in Oxfordshire, Kent, Surrey, you wouldn't have any. There's loads of charges everywhere. I have to admit that I have driven through Wales a couple of times and going, where's the fucking charge? But it's got better even since then. And I think the last thing I want to say is quickly, you'll see the big chargers at motorway services that charge your car fast. I use those, but probably twice a month, and I drive a long way in electric cars. What is much more useful is a car park with a little socket on that trickles charges your car while you're doing something else, so you don't wait. I make all the arrangements I can in my life so I never wait while a car is charging. I want to do something else. Boring waiting. Standing by a petrol pump, which I did for years of my life, is really boring. I never do that.
So in terms of kind of when Mars changes its fleet around in the next few years, are you saying that actually electric is probably going to be the way that these big trucks are going to go rather than hydrogen? Is that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd be very happy if it went to hydrogen. I mean, there are some really big, serious issues with hydrogen. There's a huge amount of pressure, commercial pressure to use hydrogen. And 90% of that comes from the fossil fuel industry because they supply all the hydrogen. So people think, oh, hydrogen, that's clean fuel. It is at point of use. It's brilliant. I'd much prefer we used hydrogen than diesel, but it is being steam reformed out of natural gas. So it's effectively a fossil fuel. Currently, all the CO2 in that natural gas is leached off into the atmosphere, interestingly. And then the hydrogen is then compressed and stored and whatever. You can make hydrogen using, for instance, a wind turbine using excess wind. You generate 4 kilowatt hours of electricity. You get about 1 kilowatt hour of hydrogen. And that 1 kilowatt hour of hydrogen energy, of the energy in that hydrogen, will move a car about 6 miles. So you're putting 5 kilowatt hours, effectively using 5 kilowatt hours to move a car. Well, an electric car will do about 5 miles on 1 kilowatt hour. So the economy, the economics don't add up yet. And that could all change. I would be 100% behind it changing. I think it should change, but I just want that caveat of the people who say, well, hydrogen is obviously the future, are being paid by the fossil fuel industry to say it. And I think that's always, always worth remembering. And why aren't there hundreds of hydrogen fuel cell cars on the roads now? Because they're incredibly expensive and there's nowhere to fill them. So, I mean, and why are there now, I don't know what, over 1 million battery electric cars? It's because it's technology that works.
Now, if you're a freelance sound recordist and you've got a car, you travel every day to location, what are the kind of financial considerations, do you think, for why you might want to swap to an EV next time you change your car?
I mean, the negative side, they cost more at the moment. But that's about to change. In the next couple of years, that'll change. Can I do my quick?
Yeah.
So in 2010, when I started making Fully Charged Show, to build, for a factory to build 1 kilowatt hour of storage of battery, to make a battery that can store 1 kilowatt hour cost about it's between 1,700 and 1,800 pounds. And actually this morning, I read the report from a company in China called CATL that have just started commercially producing batteries at $79 a kilowatt hour. So the price has dropped from 1,800 to 79. That's quite a substantial drop in 13 years. That means that now it will be possible, it won't happen because capitalism, but it's possible to build a new electric car cheaper than it is to build a new petrol car. And that will eventually be reflected in the price. But at the moment, it is without question more expensive to buy a new car. I had to think about this for years because I never bought new cars before I knew about electric cars. I didn't know anyone who bought new cars, even posh actors I knew. Chris Barry, might have heard of him. He's never bought a new car. That's because he buys beautiful classic cars, Bob, and I wouldn't have one of your electric cars if my life depended on it. But so I didn't know about buying new cars. I mean, I didn't know anyone who bought new cars. And so now we lease cars. My company leases electric cars. So and the cost of leasing a car, an electric car is maybe £50 a month more expensive than an equivalent petrol car of the same size and all that. The running costs are embarrassing. You know, most electric people who drive electric cars don't want to tell you how much it costs them to drive because it's not fair. It's cruel, you know, because it's so much cheaper. Last summer I did, because I kept a record of, I haven't bothered this summer because it wasn't as sunny, but last summer was really nice. And I kept a record. I did 5,500 miles in a Tesla Model 3 for 0 pence of fuel costs. So there's running costs, there's insurance, there's all the other things but I charged it off solar panels at my house. That's the only place I charged it from for that time. And it cost me nothing in fuel. So it takes a long time of a super economic petrol car to get close to that yearly cost. That's one thing. The fuel costs are less. The maintenance costs are mind-boggling. The average 4-cylinder petrol engine has 2,500 moving parts. What does a moving part mean? It's metal and it goes, I don't want to make it a rude image, but stuff is rubbing together constantly. It needs oil under pressure to keep those pieces of metal moving. That creates heat, that wastes energy. Every time you put a pound of fuel in your petrol or diesel car, 75 pence plus is totally wasted. It does not move you along the road. When you put a pound of electricity in an electric car, 90% of that electricity moves you along the road. An electric motor has one moving part, not 2,500. They last longer. So there's a Tesla Model S in America that has done 1 million miles. Now it's had everything replaced. The axles, the drivetrain, the seats, the bonnet, everything has been, it's a limousine that goes between Las Vegas and Los Angeles. And they've replaced the battery at about 650,000 miles. And that is a very early version of an electric car. So the key points I want to make, they last longer. They go further for less money. You won't get range anxiety because that's another term that was coined by the fossil fuel industry. Actually, General Motors coined that one. And they're much easier to drive and much nicer to drive. So if you can, obviously I'm a keen advocate for them, but also if you can't, it really isn't your fault that you can't. And I think you will be able to in the next 5 years. One last point. Next year, there's going to be 138,000 3-year-old electric cars coming onto the market that we know about. These are big leasing companies that lease to fleets. And so one of them is releasing 138,000 electric vehicles next year. When you see a big company that supplies company cars to big companies, I didn't know anything about this. They keep spreadsheets and they keep incredibly accurate data of everything how much it costs to run, how much it costs to service, how many tires it uses, what are the brakes, And why are they buying electric cars in the hundreds of thousands? Because they're cheaper. That's basically it. It's not me saying it. It's proper capitalists with spreadsheets.
So a good second-hand market coming next year as well.
Hugely increased second-hand market, which is already very healthy now. You can buy a second-hand electric car for under £4,000 today. It will be a bit shit, but you can get one. You know, they do exist.
Ella, moving on to circularity.
Sorry, I did rude words. Sorry.
Can you talk a bit about what CAMA are doing and why it's so significant, really?
Yeah, so I think traditionally we've been known as a storage company, but actually a lot of what we're looking at is what happens at the point when storage isn't needed anymore. And that's a big question for the film and TV industry and also for the construction industry who we work with. It's a big question for everyone when they're looking at things they consume and own. So part of that now is supporting studios and productions to ensure that prop sets and costumes are always getting recirculated in. We have a massive reuse network, and the priority for us is to get those assets recirculated back into the industry, and if not, into social initiatives, so schools and theatres, charities too. So it's a focus on reuse and also evidencing data. So through all of that reuse network, we realized that there's a whole load of data there that isn't being captured. And I mean, even reading reports now, understandably, there's a huge focus on fuel and transport and power. But what we're really missing is scope 3 emissions. And I know that's kind of like a whole can of worms that no one ever really wants to open, but actually they're a huge source of emissions for all industries, particularly the film and TV industry. And there's a lot more pressure now on studios at a studio level to report on that. So what we saw is this massive amount of uncaptured data. So what we do is we calculate the emissions avoided through reuse versus what they would have looked like if a production had bought all of those prop sets and costumes new and sent them to landfill, which is what they'd typically been doing. And the data is crazy. I mean, on one production we looked at, and this is just the assets we had installed that we sent out for reuse, they're looking at over 7 million kilograms of CO2 equivalent avoided. And if they'd offset their emissions from assets that were bought new and landfilled, they would have been planting over 20,000 acres of forest, which is just like, first of all, expensive and also ridiculous. And there are so many immediate benefits that come from reuse. Carbon emissions alone, social impact is a huge one, and also time and money. Allowing the industry to reuse items, glasses, costumes that already exist is a cost benefit to them. So that's a big part now, that data evidencing. And the reuse network, as I said, is really, really large, and it spreads around the UK, and it's at a studio and a production level.
Brilliant. One of the things that has come out of the Screen New Deal report is the sense that we need to be doing life cycle analysis of things. And that, again, is something, can you just explain for people what a sort of life cycle analysis is?
Yeah, so life cycle analysis, to use the scary word carbon footprint, looks at the carbon footprint of objects. What we specifically do at CAMA is the life cycle of reuse. So it's the action of reuse itself. I think that's really exciting and important when looking at the Screen New Deal report, because when you're looking at avoided emissions, that is directly dealing with reduction. And it's nice that there's a focus, I think, now shifting really to reduction, because in being able to evidence that, you can see exactly what's happening from end to end of those assets. And we were saying this earlier, but I think there's a really fine line for productions in an industry that is very freelance and very, very quick and very rushed. There's a really fine line between when an asset becomes waste. The irony being that even in the word asset itself suggests that it's a benefit to a production. And then all of a sudden you get to wrap and it's 5 o'clock on a Friday and everyone's panicking and rushing and putting things in skips. And actually those assets don't just suddenly become waste because they're not of use to that production anymore. There's a whole load of potential, whether that's upcycling or whether that's reuse in another production that exists there. So it's really good that life cycle is being included. And again, understandably, the focus has been on operational infrastructure emissions, but actually there's a whole load to be captured there, and there's a whole load to be reduced that's already being reduced. But now it's just, yeah, putting a figure on that.
So the thing is, it takes a bit of effort, doesn't it? Because you have to start planning for this. You have to start thinking about what you're going to do at the end of production. I mean, I've been supporting a sort of production recently where nothing was kind of thrown away at the end. I mean, even silly bits of foam that were used for sort of safety padding around a stage, that went off to be used as insulation material for a charity. And, you know, everything was kind of got rid of and went to another home. So it is possible, isn't it, to completely reduce it to zero if you try.
It is, and I think that's the key thing too, having those conversations at an early stage, preferably in pre-production, and thinking about what is our waste strategy, what is the plan for each and every individual thing. And we work with our partners who, I mean, No Floor No More is one of them. They do a lot around carpets and flooring, which have huge,
Use them.
yeah,
Good.
huge environmental impact. And the chemicals in carpets alone, when they're burnt, are horrendous for the environment. The British Film Designers Guild as well are doing a lot around circularity and getting those conversations in from day one at the point of design. How are we designing things with circularity in mind? How are we designing things, even when they're high IP, in a way where they can be reused without them, you know, challenging anyone's intellectual property or artistic integrity? How are we factoring that decision making in so that at the point an asset does become waste, we're already treating like it has a new home and like it can have a whole new life after this? And there's loads and loads of organizations out there that we work with. And I mean, this was touched on in the last session too massively, is about talking to one another. And we wouldn't have the reuse network that we have if we didn't speak to our partners and if we didn't have an ear to the ground in the industry and we weren't working with line producers and we weren't working with asset managers at a studio level. all those conversations are happening in parallel with each other. And what's nice now is that they're converging and they're happening together. And I mean, we were talking to a studio the other day, the logistics team who work with the asset managers, who are now working with the Scope 3 data managers in LA. And that's actually a good point to make, because California have now introduced a new law, and it's the first of its kind, and they're making Scope 3 reporting mandatory by 2027 for businesses that have a revenue of over billions of dollars. But that actually impacts the British film industry massively, because what's the productions that are being filmed here that have a home and funding in LA, that's LA Scope 3. So the more we're looking at that now, the better. The more conversations that are happening, the better. And the fact that those different teams are communicating with each other is a really good sign that it's moving in the right direction.
Now, storage is really important. So having the facilities to be able to store and catalog so that you can reuse things is really good. But at the same time, there is sometimes a danger that when things go into storage, they go into that sort of black hole and get forgotten about. Trying to keep things in circulation. I mean, again, I've had experience recently. A colleague of mine is supporting a film where it was set in the late 1960s, early 1970s, and she knew of another production that was about to start that was also set in the same period. And all of the costumes were kind of moved from one production straight to the next. They were sold, so there was money coming back to the production. So how do we have those conversations to keep things in circulation?
So there's actually a great example of that. One element of what we do is having an asset management software, which I'm obviously going to plug. So Asset Flow is basically a cataloging tool for production. So right now, when things come into storage, our team take photos of everything. They're itemizing everything. There's descriptions, there's dimensions, which is really important because then you can collect data used for life cycle analysis later on. So it's having that traceability and transparency from the production that currently has it, that can then be gifted to the next production. Because what we're essentially creating is then a marketplace of future assets. So in pre-production for a production that's happening in 6 months' time, they're already looking and they're eyeing up, oh, we want that table for our shoot. We're definitely going to use that. We're going to use those costumes. And there's one production we worked on and there were a load of loads of period suits of armor, and they got reused. The majority of it got reused back in the industry on some really iconic shows. And that was only able to happen because there was that transparency and sharing, which is really important. I think the other thing you touched on there is storage. So obviously we're a storage company, and lots of conversations we're having right now are, how can we create holding spaces that aren't dead zones for assets to just go in and be forgotten about? Now, obviously Asset Flow helps with part of that, but part of that is also about innovating the culture that we have and how we introduce facilities, physical spaces to share better, because it's all well and good discussing, oh, this person would love this, but it's not always practical if you don't have a space to hold those really valuable things that someone might want in 6 months' time, particularly when it's in a short time frame. And there's lots of conversations we're having right now with the theatre industry too. There's lots of interest there, and they're kind of peeking at what's happening in film and TV and trying to borrow ideas and get in there with us, which is really exciting. But looking at hub models and reuse pockets, and even at studios themselves having designated spaces where reuse can happen. And again, once you're having conversations at day one, that becomes much easier because you can facilitate spaces like that. I think it's just now about finding the right partners and the right conversations at the right stages to create those physical hubs too, I guess.
I think there's a lot of opportunities for studios to sort of support with that, with storage. I just remember back when I started in my career at BBC Television Centre, probably the most sustainable kind of setup we ever had. You know, it had costume stores, wig stores, prop stores, construction, catering, everything on site. And as a director of a children's program where we had no budget, I could go to the prop store and get a crazy prop from the goodies and then use it, borrow it, and then put it back. You know, it was brilliant. And those opportunities need to come back, don't they?
We've got a really good relationship with the studio right now where their permanent asset managers have almost like a sharing account on what we do. So when they upload assets in there from current production, they can then go in there and have a look around, basically a digital version of what the BBC was doing, to go and have a look around in a nose. And it's almost like online shopping for your own stuff. It's like in Clueless when Cher looks like shops for her wardrobe on a little iPad. It's like that, but like at a big film and TV scale. And I think it is the irony of all of this is that we're bringing up things that already exist, and it's innovation around ways that we used to do things that worked really well, and now just upgrading them a little bit so that they work for the industry that we have today. whether it's borrowing ideas from Clueless or what the BBC used to do. And we had a really good conversation with the BBC comedy team around their sets and how they were reused much better in the past and how we can move towards a model that looks more like that in the future. So it really is also sometimes, as much as it is about innovating for the future, it's also about borrowing ways that really worked in the past.
Brilliant. Time, I think, to ask some questions. Does anybody have hands up? Oh, Miranda here.
Thank you. That's brilliant. Thanks, Doug. Just about electric vehicles. As we're trying to persuade our freelance crews and often have very young people maybe booking rental vehicles and things like that, and then might be sent out, you know, okay, you got your car, off you go. What are the sort of top tips to try and, you know, for new drivers, and what are the quirks of electric vehicles that we need to, you know, if they get nervous about?
I think the simplest and quickest one is Zap Map, if you can remember that, because that's a really good app that tells you where all the chargers are and tells you what they are and tells you whether they're in use now if you sign up for their which is free to use. That's very helpful. What else? I don't know. Don't crash. Go slow. You know, drive the slower the better. You know, it's but they really encourage you. If you do 57 miles an hour, you'll get over 5 miles per kilowatt hour. Result. And if you thrash it, you use more electricity, which is quite like a combustion car, strangely enough. If you drive an Audi A8, I think, or whatever it is, one of those big ones along the Autobahn at 150 miles an hour, it's doing 3 miles to the gallon, which is not terribly good. But you would never think about that. We were never told about that on Top Gear, were we? But what else? I'm just trying to think, because my daughter drives my old Nissan Leaf. She works in television production, and she's I don't know, she's not rung up in tears from the side of the road on a rainy night going, Dad, I've run out. Electric cars drive you insane, warning you about you're low on your batteries. And when you've got 40 miles left, you go, shut up. Charge a car. Well, it's 2,500 cars a week the AA turn out to because they've run out of fuel. 2,500 cars a week. And that is petrol. They're all petrol. They have vans that can go to electric cars. They've been to like 3. I mean, it's hopeless because you know if the cars could break down or have a puncture, that's different. But they don't run out. So I think that's firstly, 1, you won't run out. 2, shut up. 3, don't drive fast. 4, use that map.
Good advice.
5, stop moaning, whining. You've got a job. You're lucky. That's just, I'm being bitter.
Any other questions from anyone? Oh, over here.
I'm Neil Romanek from the Flint. Just had a question about, nobody had mentioned virtual production yet and kind of how that applies to some of the things that studios are doing. And then I was also wondering in terms of those assets, like, are any of those being digitized for, I don't know how much carbon you're saving that, but, you know, digitized to be used for virtual work or virtual sets or games or whatever else?
I don't know tons about virtual production because obviously we're mostly handling physical assets, but I know, I mean, this is definitely a question for our software engineer, but I know there are early discussions about having digital assets on a platform like AssetFlow. There was a really good working group and a focus group discussion on a new Open University project called the Environmental Impact of Filmmaking. And I know, I mean, this is just a thought to offer to the room, but they were looking at the carbon impact of R2D2 15 years ago when it was physical versus now that they're using data servers to host it digitally. And actually the carbon impact is much higher. So that's not to say we should always make new things, obviously from a reuse and circular economy background. So please don't do that. But it is definitely food for thought to think about when we think we're doing the right thing and when we think something is more sustainable. Actually looking at things comparatively is really important. And I know that's the case, particularly in that research project, because it's especially around virtual production and looking at assets. But yeah, I would definitely recommend, I mean, I don't have much to say on it, but that project is definitely a good one to look into, specifically with Lucasfilm's data.
So again, it's that life cycle analysis, isn't it, to sort of compare?
Yeah.
It's so important.
Can I just mention, because we did discuss this very briefly just before, one of the topics that we've tried to cover on the Fully Charged show is server farms and the energy use of server farms. And we've asked all sorts of people, you know, you'd think might be a bit reticent about us covering them, and they've been very welcoming and say, oh yeah, come and see what we're doing. Server farms, no, that door is locked. They don't want to discuss it. It is, I mean, all our server farms that we all use when we search on all those things, when we watch YouTube videos, it's a staggering amount of electricity. So when you're using an enormous, I don't know if you saw the difference between asking a chat GPT a question and asking Google a question. It's like 48 kilowatt hours for chat GPT and 5 watts for the Google search. It uses huge amounts of electricity because it's hundreds of thousands of computers in big buildings in Utah going. Now, a lot of them, Google in particular, use an enormous amount of renewables because it's cheaper. They often build server farms near big, when water goes through a thing. Hydroelectric. I can picture it in my mind. I couldn't think of the word. You know, that's why they build them there, because the electricity is cheaper and it's near at hand. I mean, Bitcoin, I don't know, you may have heard about this, but Bitcoin was just a joke in terms of energy use. So that, I think, it is going to be cheaper to cover some poor actor in a load of rubber and plastic and make him remember his fucking lines. I think it's still going to be cheaper to do that for a long time than it is to have what looks identical, but is generated by 700,000 computers in Utah.
Brilliant. Any other questions? How long we're nearly? Yep. Oh, somebody over there and somebody here next, I think.
Hi there. Mary Claire from IMG. I just wanted to, Robert, you've spoken sort of very eloquently about EVs and the advantages of electric over hydrogen. I just wanted to sort of, I suppose, raise at IMG, we've recently done a live sports broadcast using solely hydrogen energy, which reduced our sort of energy carbon footprint to 0. The only waste product was water, no particulates, etc. From a cost perspective, there's obviously a lot of work to go. We were using green hydrogen, so the kind that is fully produced using renewables, and that felt like a real sort of step in the right direction, and something that, you know, I'd like the room to sort of consider for themselves in the future. And I also just wondered if the panel sort of saw any likelihood of hydrogen as a power source being something that that is likely to take off more.
I mean, can I just say, because I think that's fantastic that you did that and really good that you've followed through with it. And also I was being very specific about private motor vehicles effectively as hydrogen powered. I don't think we're going to see that, but there are key purposes. Steel making is one of the very obvious ones. Aluminium production, lots of big industrial processes that we currently can use coal for, you know, can easily, not easily, but can and are being replaced by hydrogen. But I mean, it's certainly a very plausible high energy fuel source. It's quite expensive. I think that's the main stumbling block at the moment, I would say, is economics, not technology. And the technology's just got to get cheaper. Not a lot else. You're not chipping in.
There is also, you know, some interesting work that has been done on hydrogen. So again, in the Screen New Deal reports, there's the Springwatch case study that that BBC did. So I think there are opportunities to sort of do more of this kind of thing. But of course, you know, cost is the issue. And I guess it also depends on the way our fossil fuel industries transition. You know, what are the opportunities sort of in the kind of North Sea to try and create cheaper hydrogen as well? You know, so I think that's something that that needs to kind of go hand in hand, probably, doesn't it? So, I think we had a question here.
Hannah, I'm a location manager and I work in skills and training at Film Cymru too. I love attending things like this, but I'm always really aware about solutions that are kind of thought up, to put it simply, like in London and in the kind of big and busy centre of things. But in Wales, we often face different challenges and about supply and demand for things like generators. And just wondering, in terms of like ADF and locations ones, Bridgend bases and kind of the asset storage and things, what kind of, I understand very much how we scale up those things and big and busy and constant productions, but almost how do we scale down to fit a Welsh industry that often doesn't have this turnover of big shows? Our bread and butter is like band 2 dramas, which have smaller unit bases and less budget, and we might be moving a bit more. And I just, it'd be interesting to understand if consideration has been given to kind of that Welsh unique features of our industry, and what things have maybe started or have been put in place to accommodate that and make sure we have as good of chance to improve our carbon footprint as, say, a production that's based in one of the big London studios.
Mars, is there anything you want to add?
I think that's a good. I think that's a good question. Every production is different. The size of production, the number of vehicles, the new hybrid generators that we use, they can go on a large production, a small production, whether it's a band 1 to 4. So at the moment, we provide exactly the same vehicles on, I don't know, the Dodger Christmas Special Kids program that would be suitable for production in Wales. So the infrastructure that we can supply for whether it's in London, Glasgow, Pencoed, it's exactly the same. And we have regional bases in those areas for that reason, that everything can be locally supplied. Likewise, when those productions move from region to region, we can then supply them from those regions without having to take everything with them.
And also, I think that, you know, one of the things that's come up through the Screen New Deal report that's being released today is just that opportunity to kind of bring stakeholders in Wales together to kind of find the right solutions for film production here. And earlier this morning, we had a really positive conversation around that, you know, how we can kind of bring stakeholders, suppliers together to start talking to each other, to share experience, to not be working in silos, to be able to kind of offer opportunities to kind of collaborate, really. And I think that's the action I think that we now need to see over the next few months moving forward from this work. So
I would also try and challenge Norm, really. So you rent for production rents a small to medium size sort of warehouse to do some work. Don't assume you need to get a generator in. Speak to electricians on site. We've come across a few instances where electricians will just demand 400 amps there and then, but actually we're getting away with 200 amps now because they're using LED lighting, not tungsten lighting, and also they're using single phase, so you can get 3 phases. You can get a lot more out of it. So, you know, if you're in a facility for a few months and you can get into a renewable energy supply at that place, don't just bring in a generator. Sorry if there's any generator suppliers here, but don't bring in the generator firsthand. Do some intelligent sort of conversation with a few people and just see, you know, we've just done it on one of our productions. We're getting away with 200 amps easily, and we've got a few tungsten lights in that 200 amps. So if you can, don't assume that you've got to, and you speak to any TV spot, we want 400 amps, 3 phases, that's up to 1200 amps. So yeah, don't just take their word for it, challenge it.
brilliant. Well, on that note, good note to end on. Thank you very much to the panel. It's been a great discussion. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Steve, and the panel as well. Apologies about the power cut, especially to those of you streaming. It is lovely to have you back with us. Now, it is important to understand that no one is going to be able to achieve anything in a vacuum, but we can make powerful changes together, and with the right systems in place, we should get there, shouldn't we?